Priscilla Wentworth Okafor, 37 years old, director of the Holloway Community Health Initiative and wife of Brennan Okafor, did not flinch when her husband dropped the divorce papers on the kitchen island at 6:43 in the morning. She was still holding her coffee. The mug was warm. She set it down carefully, the way she always did, without a sound, and looked at the stack of documents as if she were reviewing a grant proposal that needed revision. Brennan Okafor, 42 years old, Chief Operations Officer of Vantage Meridian Health Group, stood on the other side of the island with his arms crossed and his jaw set. He had been practicing this moment. She could tell by the way he held his shoulders. Too straight, like a man bracing for a reaction he'd scripted. "I think we both know this has been coming," he said. Priscilla picked up the papers. She did not read them. She already knew what they said. She had seen drafts before, not because anyone had shown her, but because Brennan had a habit of leaving his laptop open on the kitchen counter when he thought she was asleep. She had not been asleep for a long time. "Who drew these up?" she asked. He hesitated. "My attorney." "Which attorney, Brennan?" He uncrossed his arms. "Does it matter?" She set the papers back down, face up, and looked at that name printed at the bottom of the first page, Orville & Slate. She recognized that firm. They specialized in asset protection, not divorce proceedings. The fact that Brennan had gone to them first told her everything she needed to know about what this was actually about. Priscilla Wentworth Okafor had known her husband for 11 years. She had married him when he was an operations manager at a regional hospital system, when they shared a one-bedroom apartment in Charlotte, and she drove a 2009 Honda Accord with a cracked dashboard. She had loved him when there was nothing to love about their situation except each other. She had also watched him change. Not suddenly. That was the thing about people who changed badly. They didn't do it in one dramatic moment. They did it in small adjustments, the way a river slowly reroutes itself around a stone. A cancelled dinner here, a private phone call there, a new opinion about which of her friends he thought were too much. The Brennan who had brought her soup when she had the flu in 2017, and the Brennan who now stood across from her with divorce papers in a kitchen that cost more than her parents' house. Those two men shared a face and very little else. She had documented everything, not out of suspicion at first. Out of habit. Priscilla had spent 15 years working in non-profit healthcare administration. She was trained to track, to file, to date stamp. When Brennan started coming home at odd hours, she didn't install software on his phone or hire a private investigator. She simply paid attention, and she kept her own records. The name she had not yet said aloud was Sloan Waverly. Sloan, 31, a VP of Partnerships at Vantage Meridian Health Group, who had been photographed 3 times with Brennan at industry dinners over the past 14 months, each time listed in the event program as guests, without any mention of their respective spouses. Priscilla had those programs in a folder on her personal laptop. She had a lot of folders. "I'll have my attorney contact yours," she said, and picked up her coffee. Brennan looked almost disappointed. He had expected tears, maybe accusations. She could read it on his face, the slight drop at the corners of his mouth, the way his eyes tracked her as if waiting for something to explode. "Priscilla, I have a board meeting at 9, she said. "I'd appreciate it if you could be gone before I get home tonight." She walked out of the kitchen. He was not gone when she got home, but he had moved his things to the guest room, which told her that despite everything, he still did not fully understand what was happening. The Holloway Community Health Initiative had been Priscilla's professional home for 6 years. She had come in as deputy director after leaving a larger hospital foundation in Atlanta, and within 18 months, she had restructured the initiative's grant portfolio, negotiated 3 new funding partnerships, and overseen the opening of 2 free clinics in underserved neighborhoods in the greater Charlotte area. The board loved her in the way that boards loved people who made their oversight responsibilities feel uncomplicated. What the board did not know, what almost no one outside of 2 attorneys and a private trust administration firm knew, was that Priscilla Wentworth Okafor was the sole beneficiary and controlling trustee of the Wentworth Medical Legacy Trust. Her grandfather, Dr. Alphonse Wentworth, had built a network of private diagnostic centers across the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast over 40 years. When he died in 2014, he left his estate in a structured trust designed to prevent exactly the kind of situation Priscilla's father had warned her about when she was 19. People who would attach themselves to the Wentworth name for access to what it carried. The trust was worth approximately $1.8 billion. Priscilla had never told Brennan. This required some explanation, and she had given it careful thought over the years. She had not lied to him. She had simply not offered information he had never asked about with the right questions. Brennan knew her grandfather had been a doctor. He knew there had been some inheritance. She'd told him there was a modest trust from her family, which was technically accurate. The way saying the Pacific is a body of water is technically accurate. She had grown up watching her mother field phone calls from men who became interested in her family's name. She had watched her cousin marry someone who spent 18 months learning exactly when to propose relative to the trust's distribution calendar. She had decided at 22 that she would build her own life first and see who showed up for that life. Brennan had showed up for that life, and then, gradually, he had stopped being interested in it. The first time Priscilla walked into Vantage Meridian's executive floor, she had been 29 years old, and she had gone as Brennan's guest to a company holiday party. She had worn a burgundy dress and spent most of the evening talking to the catering staff because they were more interesting than anyone at the VP tables. Brennan had been mortified. He'd said so later, quietly, while they were driving home. "You have to work a room, Priscilla. You have to be present." She'd looked out the window at the highway lights and said nothing. The second time she walked into Vantage Meridian's executive floor was 8 weeks after Brennan served her divorce papers, and she had brought her attorney, a forensic accountant, and a letter from Wentworth Medical Legacy Trust's administration firm. She had not told Brennan she was coming. The meeting had been requested through proper channels. She had asked to speak with the board's audit committee, citing a concern from a community health partner about billing irregularities in Vantage Meridian's partnership contracts. That was the official reason. It was also a true reason. It was simply not the complete reason. Priscilla Wentworth Okafor sat down across from 4 members of Vantage Meridian's board and placed a 47-page document on the table. "I want to walk you through some concerns about the Meridian Community Bridge Program," she said, specifically the vendor contracts attached to the payroll allocation in fiscal years 2023 and 2024. The audit committee chair, a man named Fletcher Drummond, looked at the document and then looked at her. "Mrs. Okafor, this is Wentworth," she said. "For the purposes of this conversation, I'll be going by Wentworth." There was a brief silence in the room. She had not spoken that name professionally in 11 years. Fletcher Drummond set down his glasses and looked at her with an expression that had shifted from politely skeptical to entirely attentive. "Please," he said, "continue." What Priscilla had found, methodically, over 8 months, using only information that was publicly available or disclosed to community partners, was a pattern of vendor payments routed through the Meridian Community Bridge Program that did not align with the program's stated purpose. The program was supposed to fund mobile health screenings in underserved zip codes. What it had actually funded, in significant part, was a series of consulting contracts with a firm called SWV Strategic Partners. SWV Strategic Partners had no public footprint, no website, no registered office address beyond a Delaware shell. Its principal, a single March 22. Sloan Waverly had legally changed her name from Sloan Waverly Vincent to Sloan Waverly in April 2022. SWV. Priscilla had not made a single accusation. She had presented columns of numbers, contract dates, and public filings. She had let the documents do the speaking. She had also let the board know, quietly, through her attorney's letter, that the Wentworth Medical Legacy Trust had been reviewing potential philanthropic investment partners in the Charlotte healthcare sector, and that this review was ongoing, pending the outcome of the audit committee's inquiry. $1.8 billion had a way of making audit committees move quickly. Brennan found out she had been at Vantage Meridian's offices the same day it happened. Someone in the executive suite called him. She knew this because he was sitting in the living room when she got home, and his face had the look of a man who had just discovered that the floor he'd been standing on was not the floor. "What did you do?" he said. Priscilla set her bag on the chair by the door. She was tired. It had been a long day, and she had driven past a gas station where she and Brennan had once stopped to buy terrible coffee at 2 in the morning on a road trip to see her grandmother. And she had felt something she did not want to feel, so she had kept up. "I attended a meeting," she said. "You went to my board." "I went to the audit committee of a healthcare organization that has a partnership with the initiative I run," she said. "That's a professional obligation, Priscilla." His voice had gone low. She recognized that register. It was the voice he used when he wanted her to understand that she had crossed a line he hadn't told her existed. "You don't understand what you've started." She looked at him for a long moment. "I understand exactly what I've started," she said. "What you're confused about is when I started it." She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed in the room they had shared for 4 years and looked at the window. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. A dog barked once and then stopped. She did not cry. She had already done that, alone, in the parking garage of her office building about 6 weeks ago, and it had lasted exactly 9 minutes. And then she had wiped her face, and gone back to her desk because there was a funding report due, and the clinics in the East Side corridor needed their operational budget approved by the end of the week. There was always something that needed to be done. That had always been true. She had always been the one doing it. The audit committee's initial findings were delivered to the full board within 3 weeks. Priscilla was not in the room, but her attorney was. What the committee had found, with the help of a forensic accounting firm that moved very quickly once the trust's name was involved, was that approximately $4.3 million in community health program funds had been routed to SWV strategic partners over 26 months. The consulting contracts showed no documented deliverable. The program reports, which bore Brennan's approval signature as CO, showed healthy activity metrics that did not correspond any verifiable services rendered. It was not embezzlement in the simplest sense. It was more careful than that. It had the look of something designed by someone who understood institutional compliance well enough to know where the blind spots were. Brennan Okafor was placed on administrative leave, pending investigation the following Tuesday morning. Sloan Waverly's access to Vantage Meridian systems was revoked by end of business that same day. Priscilla heard about it through her attorney. She was in a staff meeting when the call came in. She stepped out, listened, thanked the attorney, and stepped back into the meeting. "Sorry about that," she said. "Where were we?" The hardest conversation was not with Brennan. She had perhaps unexpectedly been more prepared for that conversation than any other. The hardest conversation was with Brennan's mother, Deirdre Okafor, 64, retired school administrator from Greensboro, who called on a Thursday evening and spoke for 11 minutes without pausing. Deirdre believed, genuinely and without apparent irony, that Priscilla had manufactured the financial findings. She believed that Priscilla had targeted Brennan out of spite because she had not been enough of a wife. She listed the specific ways in which Priscilla had not been enough: too focused on work, not warm enough at family gatherings, had once forgotten to bring a dish to Easter when she said she would bring one. Priscilla held the phone and listened. When Deirdre finished, Priscilla said, "I love you, Deirdre. I hope someday you'll want to have a real conversation about what happened. I'll be here when you do." She ended the call. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hand and thought about all the Easters, about the dish she hadn't brought. It was 2021. She'd had a grant deadline and driven 3 hours to make it to dinner and had forgotten the sweet potato casserole she'd promised. And Deirdre had mentioned it to 3 separate people over the course of the afternoon. And Priscilla had apologized and helped with the dishes and driven 3 hours home and not mentioned it. She had not mentioned a lot of things. That was the pattern. She saw it now with the clarity that only distance provides. She had spent the better part of a decade making herself smaller in that family's presence, and she had done it so skillfully that she had almost convinced herself it was choice. The divorce proceedings began formally in January. Brennan's attorneys filed an aggressive motion to access Priscilla's financial disclosures, which was how they finally learned about the trust. Her attorney told her about the moment in the deposition room when Brennan's legal team received the trust documentation. She was not there for it, but she imagined it, not with satisfaction exactly, but with a kind of settled recognition. The way you feel when a calculation you've been running for a long time finally resolves to exactly the number you expected. Brennan's attorney contacted her attorney 3 days later with a request to negotiate. Priscilla declined the initial offer. She declined the second offer. She accepted a modified version of the third, which included a clause she had specifically requested, a full admission, in writing, that the financial irregularities in the Meridian Community Bridge Program had occurred under Brennan's operational authority and had caused measurable harm to the community health outcomes the program was designed to support. She did not request the admission for legal purposes. She requested it because there were neighborhoods in Charlotte where families had been told a mobile screening unit was coming and it had not come. And some of those families had delayed care they needed, and she believed that deserved to be on record somewhere. Brennan's attorneys fought the clause for 2 weeks. Priscilla waited. They agreed to the clause. The Trust's Community Investment Office issued a public statement in February announcing a $12 million commitment to mobile and in-home health services across 5 counties in the Carolinas to be administered over 4 years in partnership with the Halloway Community Health Initiative. The statement did not mention Priscilla's name. She had asked for that specifically. There were people who wanted to write about it. A journalist from a regional business publication called Twice. A podcast host who covered healthcare philanthropy sent a long and thoughtful email. Priscilla responded to the email with a brief note thanking them for their interest and explaining that the trust preferred to let the work speak. She was having dinner with her college roommate, Valentina Cruz, The night the story ran anyway, a short item in the business section that referenced the trust by name, but not its trustee. Valentina held up her phone across the table. "Is this you?" Priscilla looked at the headline. She poured more water into her glass. "It's the work," she said. Valentina gave her a long look of the kind that only people who have known each other since they were 19 can give. "You've been holding this for a long time," she said. Priscilla thought about it. She thought about the divorce papers on the kitchen island, the folder with the event programs, the 47-page document, the 9 minutes in the parking garage, the sweet potato casserole. "I've been holding a lot of things for a long time," she said. "I'm setting some of them down now." The last time she saw Brennan in person was at the final signing. He looked like a man who had slept poorly for several months, which was accurate. His attorney sat beside him. Her attorney sat beside her. There was a court reporter and a cup of coffee going cold on the conference table. Brennan looked at her once, just before they signed, with an expression she could not entirely read. There was something in it that might have been the person he'd been in the apartment in Charlotte, looking out from behind the face of the person he had become. She had loved that person. She did not know what to do with that fact except to hold it and let it be true, without letting it change anything that needed to happen. She signed her name, Priscilla Wentworth Okafor. She thought briefly about whether she would keep his name or return entirely to Wentworth. She had not decided yet. She had time. For the first time in 11 years, she had more time than she knew what to do with. She stood up and shook her attorney's hand and thanked the court reporter. And then she walked out of the building into a March afternoon that smelled like rain coming in from the west. And she stood on the sidewalk for a moment with her face turned slightly upward, the way her grandfather used to stand when he was thinking. He had built something that lasted. She was beginning to understand that she had been doing the same thing, more quietly, more slowly, but with the same intention. The mobile units were scheduled to start their first routes in April, in a neighborhood called Eastfield, where the nearest clinic was 11 miles away, and 3 bus transfers. She had been to Eastfield twice to meet with community health workers who knew every family on every block. They were ready. She walked to her car, and the rain started before she reached it, and she did not run.